The town of Millbrook had always been small, suffocating in its smallness, really. Nestled in a valley between two ridges of the Appalachian Mountains, it was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business before they knew it themselves. The population hovered around 300 souls, give or take a few births and deaths each year, and the residents liked it that way. They liked their predictability, their unspoken rules, their certainty that tomorrow would look exactly like yesterday. But Millbrook had a dark side, one that festered beneath its quaint wooden storefronts and whitewashed church steeple. The town had standards, and those who didn't meet them were reminded in 1,000 small cruelties until they either conformed or left. And sometimes, when someone was deemed truly unacceptable, the town made that decision for them. Sarah Brennan was 23 years old, and she had lived in Millbrook her entire life. She was also, by the town's merciless assessment, obese, not just heavy or plump or any of the gentler euphemisms people sometimes used. She was large, in a way that made the town uncomfortable, that made them whisper and point and shake their heads with that particular mixture of pity and disgust that only small-town gossips could perfect. Sarah worked at the general store, stocking shelves and working the register under the watchful eye of Mrs. Hutchinson, who made it clear through tight-lipped sighs that she was doing Sarah a favor by employing her at all. Sarah lived with her mother in a small house at the edge of town, the kind of house that had been built hastily and never quite finished, with peeling paint and a sagging porch that groaned under any weight. Her mother had died 3 months ago, a stroke, sudden and merciless. And without her mother's presence, without that single thread connecting her to the community, Sarah found herself more isolated than ever. The women at church stopped inviting her to potlucks. The men looked through her as if she were invisible. Children, with the casual cruelty of youth, sometimes threw pebbles at her as she walked home, giggling as they scattered. It was Mayor Thaddeus Cornwall who first suggested banishment. He brought it up at a town meeting on a humid Thursday evening in late September. The community center was packed, the air thick with body heat and the smell of coffee from the percolator in the corner. Sarah wasn't there. She never attended these meetings, knowing instinctively that she was often the subject of discussion rather than a participant. "We need to talk about the Brennan girl," Cornwall said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses as he stood at the podium. He was a thin man with a prominent Adam's apple that bobbed when he spoke, and he had the kind of voice that carried authority simply because he'd held power for so long. The room fell silent. Everyone knew who he meant. "Now, I know this is a delicate matter," Cornwall continued, clasping his hands behind his back. "But we have to think about our town's image. We have to think about our children, our future. That girl, well, she's not a good example. She's unhealthy. She's unmarriageable. She's a drain on resources." "What are you suggesting, Thaddeus?" asked Mrs. Hutchinson from the front row, though her tone suggested she already knew. "I'm suggesting we invoke the old statute," Cornwall said, "Section 12 of the town charter. Any resident deemed detrimental to the community's welfare can be asked to leave, for the greater good." There were murmurs throughout the room. Some nodded in agreement. Others shifted uncomfortably, though none spoke up in opposition. That was how things worked in Millbrook. Dissent was not welcomed. The vote was held that night. 27 in favor, 3 against, 5 abstentions. It was decided. Sarah Brennan would be given 1 week to leave town voluntarily, or she would be escorted to the town limits and forbidden from returning. The notice was delivered the next morning by Deputy Frank Morris, a young man with an unfortunate mustache and an overinflated sense of his own importance. He knocked on Sarah's door just after dawn, waking her from an uneasy sleep. "Sarah Brennan?" he said when she opened the door, still in her nightgown, her hair a tangled mess. "Yes?" "I have an official notice from the town council." He handed her a folded piece of paper, his eyes not quite meeting hers. "You've got 1 week. After that, you're not welcome here anymore." Sarah stared at the paper in her hands, her heart hammering in her chest. I don't understand. What did I do? It's not about what you did, Morris said, backing away from the porch. It's about what you are. Town's decision, nothing personal. He turned and walked back to his patrol car, leaving Sarah standing in the doorway, the morning sun casting long shadows across her yard. She unfolded the paper with trembling hands and read the words, but they didn't make sense. Detrimental to community welfare. Voluntary departure requested. Failure to comply will result in forced removal. She spent the first 2 days in a fog of disbelief. She went to work at the general store, but Mrs. Hutchinson sent her home after an hour. "No point in you staying," the older woman said curtly. "You'll be gone soon enough anyway." Sarah tried to find allies, people who would speak up for her. She went to Reverend Thomas at the church, but he offered only platitudes about God's plan and suggested that perhaps a fresh start in a new town would be good for her soul. She approached her few remaining acquaintances, but they all found reasons to be busy, to cut conversations short, to avoid her gaze. By the 5th day, Sarah was packing what little she owned into 2 battered suitcases. She had nowhere to go, no money for a bus ticket, and no skills that would make her employable in a city. But staying meant humiliation, meant being dragged out by deputies while the whole town watched. At least if she left on her own terms, she could preserve some shred of dignity. On the 6th day, she walked into town one last time to buy provisions for her journey. She would walk to the next town, Ridgeway, about 15 miles away. Maybe someone there would be kinder. Maybe she could find work, start over, build something resembling a life. She was coming out of the general store with a paper bag of bread and cheese when she saw the crowd gathering in the town square. Her stomach dropped. They weren't waiting until tomorrow. They were coming for her now. Mayor Cornwall stood at the center of the crowd, flanked by Deputy Morris and 4 other men. They all had the same look on their faces, determination mixed with a kind of righteous satisfaction. The townspeople formed a semicircle around them, watching with the morbid curiosity of people who'd come to see a spectacle. "Sarah Brennan," Cornwall called out, his voice carrying across the square. "Your time is up. We're here to escort you to the town limits." "But you said I had a week," Sarah protested, her voice breaking. "It's only been 6 days." "Close enough," Cornwall said with a dismissive wave. "We've decided it's better to handle this now. Get it over with." The men began walking toward her. Sarah backed away, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. This wasn't right. This wasn't legal. But in a town like Millbrook, legality was whatever the mayor said it was. "Please," she whispered, but her plea was lost in the murmur of the crowd. And then, cutting through the tension like a knife through butter, came the sharp crack of a rifle shot. Everyone froze. The sound echoed off the mountains, reverberating through the valley. Sarah looked up, her eyes searching for the source, and there, at the far end of the square, stood a man she'd never seen before. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and a frame built from years of hard living. His face was weathered and tanned, covered by a thick beard shot through with gray. He wore a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms corded with muscle, and heavy boots that had seen more trails than roads. In his hands was a lever-action rifle, still smoking from the shot he'd fired into the air. "That's far enough," the man said, his voice deep and calm, but carrying an undercurrent of danger that made every person in the square take a step back. "Who the hell are you?" Mayor Cornwall demanded, trying to recover his authority. "This is a private town matter. You have no business here." The man walked forward slowly, deliberately, his rifle held casually but ready. "Name's Daniel Frost. I live up in the mountains. Been up there about 7 years now. I come down maybe once a year for supplies, and I've got to say, in all my trips through this valley, I've never seen anything quite as pathetic as what's happening here today." "This doesn't concern you," Cornwall said, puffing out his chest. "The girl's being removed for the good of the community." "The good of the community?" Daniel repeated, his tone dripping with contempt. That what you call it when you gang up on someone who can't fight back, when you banish someone for the crime of existing in a way that makes you uncomfortable? Deputy Morris stepped forward, his hand moving to the pistol on his hip. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to lower that weapon and leave the area. Daniel's eyes flicked to the deputy, and something in his gaze made the younger man's hand freeze. I don't think you want to do that, son. I've been living alone in those mountains for a long time. Dealt with bears, wolves, and men who thought they were tougher than they were. You're not going to outdraw me, and you're not going to intimidate me. So why don't you take your hand off that pistol before someone gets hurt? The deputy's hand slowly moved away from his gun. Daniel turned his attention to Sarah, who was still standing frozen, clutching her bag of provisions. You. Sarah, is it? You got a place to go? Sarah shook her head, tears streaming down her face. No, I don't have anywhere. Then you're coming with me, Daniel said simply. I've got a cabin up in the mountains. It's not much, but it's safe, and it's a hell of a lot better than whatever fate these folks have planned for you. Now wait just a minute, Cornwell began, but Daniel cut him off. I'm not asking for your permission, Mayor. I'm telling you what's going to happen. This girl is leaving with me, and if any of you have a problem with that, you're welcome to try to stop me. But I promise you, it won't end well for anyone. He raised the rifle slightly, not quite pointing it at anyone, but making his capabilities clear. The crowd shifted nervously. These were shopkeepers and farmers, not fighters. Daniel Frost looked like someone who'd killed his share of things that fought back. You can't just take her, Mrs. Hutchinson said from the crowd. What kind of arrangement are you proposing? This is indecent. Daniel laughed, a harsh sound. Indecent? You're worried about decency? You people were about to throw her out to starve or be preyed upon by whoever or whatever she encountered on the road. Don't talk to me about decency. He gestured to Sarah. Come on, get whatever you need from your house. We leave in 10 minutes. Sarah hesitated only a moment before nodding. She ran back toward her home, her lungs burning, barely believing what was happening. She grabbed her 2 packed suitcases and the small box of her mother's keepsakes, a few photographs, her wedding ring, a hand-stitched quilt. It was all she had left in the world. When she returned to the square, Daniel was still standing in the same position, his rifle keeping the crowd at bay. The townspeople looked angry but uncertain. No one wanted to be the first to challenge this mountain man who'd appeared like something out of a legend. Ready? Daniel asked. Yes, Sarah said, her voice stronger now. Good, let's go. They walked together out of the square, down Main Street, and toward the edge of town. The crowd followed at a distance, muttering and whispering, but not daring to approach. At the town limits, where a faded wooden sign read, "You are leaving Millbrook, come again soon," Daniel finally stopped and turned back. Listen to me, all of you, he called out. This girl is under my protection now. That means if any of you come looking for her, if any of you try to harm her or harass her, you'll answer to me. And trust me when I say you don't want that. I know these mountains better than any of you know your own backyards. I can disappear and reappear like a ghost, so unless you want to spend the rest of your lives looking over your shoulders, I suggest you forget she ever existed. With that, he turned and began walking up the trail that led into the mountains, Sarah hurrying to keep pace beside him. They walked for 3 hours, climbing steadily upward on paths that grew narrower and more overgrown. Sarah's legs ached, her lungs burned, but she didn't complain. Daniel moved with the easy confidence of someone who'd made this journey 1,000 times, occasionally pausing to help her over particularly difficult terrain. Finally, as the afternoon sun began to dip toward the horizon, they emerged into a small clearing. Daniel's cabin sat nestled against a rock face, built from logs he'd clearly cut and shaped himself. It was rustic, but solid, with a stone chimney and a covered porch. A small garden grew to one side, and a creek burbled nearby. Home, Daniel said simply. It's not fancy, but it keeps the weather out. Sarah set down her suitcases, looking around in wonder. It was beautiful here, in a wild and untamed way. The air was cleaner than in the valley, sharp with the scent of pine and mountain laurel. "Why did you help me?" she asked, the question that had been burning in her mind since the square. "You don't know me. You don't owe me anything." Daniel was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the mountains. Finally he said, 7 years ago, I lost my wife and daughter. Fire took our house in the middle of the night. I got out. They didn't. After that, I couldn't stand being around people anymore. All their pettiness, their cruelty, their judgments. So I came up here to be alone." He turned to look at Sarah, his eyes sad but kind. "But being alone doesn't mean being heartless. When I saw what they were doing to you, I saw my daughter. She was different too. She had a birthmark across half her face, and kids used to tease her, made her cry almost every day. I swore I'd always protect people like her, people who get punished just for being who they are. So when I saw you standing there, terrified and alone, I couldn't just walk away." Sarah felt tears welling up again, but this time they were different. Not tears of fear or despair, but of gratitude and relief. "Thank you," she whispered. "You saved my life." "Maybe," Daniel said. "Or maybe you saved mine. Haven't had much purpose up here. Feels good to have someone to look after again." They spent the evening settling Sarah into the cabin's spare room, a small space with a bed and a window overlooking the valley. Daniel cooked dinner venison stew and cornbread, and they ate in comfortable silence, the day's tension finally beginning to ease. Over the following weeks, a routine emerged. Daniel taught Sarah the skills she needed to survive in the mountains: how to fish in the creek, how to identify edible plants, how to track animals, how to read the weather in the clouds. Sarah, in turn, brought a warmth to the cabin that had been absent for years. She cleaned and organized, planted herbs in the garden, and cooked meals that reminded Daniel of the life he'd lost. They talked in the evenings, sharing stories. Sarah told him about her mother, about growing up in Millbrook, about the slow accumulation of hurts that had worn away at her spirit. Daniel spoke of his wife, Mary, and daughter Emma, of the life they'd built together and the hole their absence had left in his world. "I used to think I was hiding up here," Daniel admitted one night as they sat on the porch watching stars emerge, "running away from pain. But maybe I was just waiting for a reason to come back to life." Sarah smiled. "I used to think I was broken, that there was something fundamentally wrong with me because I didn't fit into their idea of acceptable. But maybe I was just in the wrong place all along." Winter came early that year, bringing snow that blanketed the mountains in white silence. The cabin became a cocoon, warm and safe while the world outside froze. Sarah learned to chop wood, to maintain the fire, to make candles and soap from rendered fat. Daniel taught her to shoot, placing his rifle in her hands and showing her how to aim, how to breathe, how to squeeze the trigger rather than pull it. "Every person should know how to protect themselves," he said, "especially out here." Spring arrived with a rush of meltwater and blooming wildflowers. Sarah had transformed, not in body, she was still heavy, would always carry weight, but in spirit. She walked with confidence now, her shoulders back, her eyes bright. She'd found strength in the mountains, in the physical work, in Daniel's quiet respect. One April morning, Daniel came back from checking his traps to find Sarah standing on the porch, staring down toward the valley. "What is it?" he asked. "I was thinking," she said slowly, "about Millbrook, about all the people there who are probably suffering under Cornwall and his cronies, about how no one stood up for me because they were afraid." "What about them?" "Maybe it's time someone stood up to them," Sarah said, turning to face him. "Maybe it's time they learned that the people they cast out aren't as powerless as they thought." Banished, Daniel studied her for a long moment, then a slow smile spread across his weathered face. "You thinking what I think you're thinking?" "I'm thinking we take a trip down to Millbrook," Sarah said, "not for revenge, for justice, for change." They spent a week preparing. Daniel cleaned and oiled his rifle. Sarah practiced her shooting until she could hit a target at 50 yards. They gathered what they'd need: supplies, evidence of Cornwall's misuse of town funds that Daniel had heard rumors about, documentation of other families the mayor had driven out over the years. When they finally descended the mountain trail back to Millbrook, it was a warm May morning. The town looked exactly as Sarah remembered it: sleepy, self-satisfied, unchanged. They walked directly to the town square, where a small market was underway. People stopped and stared, mouths falling open. Sarah Brennan, who they'd banished 8 months ago, was back, and she wasn't alone. Mayor Cornwall emerged from the town hall, his face flushing red when he saw them. "You're not welcome here," he called out. "I thought we made that clear." "Oh, you made it clear," Sarah said, her voice steady and strong. "You made a lot of things clear, like how you've been embezzling town funds, like how you've been running protection rackets on local businesses, like how you've driven out anyone who questioned your authority." She held up a folder of documents. "Daniel here is surprisingly good at research. Turns out, when you live alone for 7 years, you develop a lot of patience for sifting through public records. These papers document 15 years of corruption, and copies have already been sent to the state attorney general." The crowd had grown silent, people exchanging glances. Cornwall sputtered, "You can't prove." "We can," Daniel said calmly, "and we did. The authorities will be here by tomorrow, but we came here first because Sarah wanted to say something to all of you." Sarah stepped forward, looking at the faces that had haunted her for years. "I'm not here for revenge. I'm here to tell you that the way you treated me, the way you treat anyone who's different, is wrong. It's cruel, and it's cowardly. You let one man dictate your morality, your compassion, your humanity, and in doing so, you lost all three." She paused, her voice softening. "But I also know that some of you are good people who were afraid, who didn't know how to stand up. So I'm here to show you that it's possible, that one person can make a difference, that the outcasts and the rejected have more power than you ever imagined." Mrs. Hutchinson stepped forward from the crowd, tears streaming down her wrinkled face. "Sarah, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I was scared and I was weak, and I failed you." Others began stepping forward, echoing her words. Not everyone, some remained silent, defensive, but enough to show that change was possible. Deputy Morris, who delivered the banishment notice, walked up to Cornwall and removed the mayor's ceremonial badge. "You're done," he said quietly. "This town deserves better." Cornwall looked around desperately but found no allies. His reign had ended not with violence, but with truth. Sarah and Daniel stayed in Millbrook for 3 days while the state investigators arrived and began their work. Cornwall was arrested, along with 2 council members who'd been complicit in his schemes. An interim government was established, with Reverend Thomas, who'd found his spine at last, serving as temporary mayor. On the morning of the 4th day, Sarah and Daniel prepared to return to the mountains, but this time, several townspeople asked if they could come visit sometime to learn from Daniel's knowledge of the wilderness, to rebuild relationships with Sarah. "Come in the summer," Sarah said with a smile. "We'll teach you how to live with the land instead of against it." As they climbed back up the trail, Sarah turned one last time to look at the valley below. Millbrook looked smaller now, less imposing. It was just a collection of buildings in a valley populated by flawed people trying to find their way. Some would change, some wouldn't, but at least now they had the opportunity. "Ready to go home?" Daniel asked. Sarah looked at the mountain ahead, at the wilderness that had given her back her life, her strength, her purpose. She thought about the cabin waiting for them, about the garden that would need tending, about the quiet evenings on the porch watching the stars emerge. "Yes," she said, "I'm ready." They climbed together, 2 people who'd found in each other what the world had tried to take away: dignity, purpose, and the understanding that true worth has nothing to do with appearance or conformity, and everything to do with courage and compassion. The mountains accepted them back with silent grace. the forest closing around them like a protective embrace. And in a cabin perched high above a valley where small-mindedness had once reigned supreme, two souls found what they'd both been seeking, a place to belong exactly as they were. Years later, people in Millbrook would tell stories about the mountain man who'd appeared with his rifle at just the right moment, and the woman he'd saved who came back to save them all. Some of the stories were embellished, as stories always are, but the core truth remained that one act of defiance, one moment of choosing courage over cruelty, had changed everything. And up in the mountains, Sarah and Daniel lived out their days in peace, their cabin a refuge for anyone who needed one, their door always open to those cast out by a world too narrow to see their worth. Sometimes, being saved means finding someone who sees you as you truly are. And sometimes, saving someone means finding yourself again in the process.